Do, 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 do. Hey, welcome to Good Thinking Live. This is our show. Welcome, Good Thinkers. Our show where we get to spend just a little bit of time away from all the time we're told what to think or studying what to think, to devote a little bit more time to improving how to think. So that's our simple goal. And if you're here, let me know that you're here. This is a participation show. It's all about us together. So let me know that you're here and where you're from. There's a little lag. I'm here on LinkedIn Live at 9 a.m. Pacific time on Mondays and 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, and also on YouTube Live. And if you are so inclined, subscribe. We're getting the channel up and running, and Good Thinking is there for you to participate live, 9 a.m. again, Pacific time, 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time on Mondays. And if you want notifications, go ahead. And I think you have to hit that little bell 2 times. Anyway, check it out and you can be notified. Welcome to everyone. And please, again, let me know who you are and where you're from. This weekend, I was watching my Oregon Ducks football, U.S. football. And I love watching college football, even though it's a frustrating season with COVID and everything. But one of the things that I had read about football, or at least college football, I don't know if this applies to NFL. If you know, you can let me know in the chat, that statistically, it's better to go for it on a 4th down. I mean, there are exceptions, I'm sure, when you're in enemy territory, et cetera, but it's statistically better to go for it on the 4th down relative to how often coaches decide to actually have their teams go for it on the 4th down. And the announcer was verifying that. I had read about that, and the announcer was verifying that. And he said, I don't really know why, coaches wouldn't do that on the 4th down. Why wouldn't they go for it more often? What, they don't want to win. And that got me thinking about today's topic, which is called defensive decision-making. And it's one of the most costly errors in business, massively costly to organizations, but it's also a very personally costly error. So we'll get into that. We're going to be short and sweet. But my first I'll say hi to Jose from San Francisco. Hey, Jose, welcome. My first question is, would you rather be wrong in a crowd or right alone? And this has implications for social media and kind of social proof and how we kind of silo ourselves into different identities and different groups. But would you rather A, be wrong in a crowd, so you're like everyone else, but you're wrong, but you're all wrong together, or you're in a meeting and you kind of think, that doesn't seem right, but I'm going to go along with it because that's what everyone else does? Or would you rather be right alone? A, wrong in a crowd, or B, right alone? Let me know what you think or what you would rather do. And defensive decision-making occurs when you, as an individual, or maybe you're managing a team, and you know through your analysis that decision A is best. Decision A is best. You've used a good decision process. You have a good decision process. You've analyzed the data. You know all the reasons that decision A is best. However, there may be a decision B, could be second best, maybe even not a good decision, but it's the one backed by most people. So you decide to forego decision A and go ahead with decision B, even though you know it's not the best, because you know that if things go wrong, you're not going to be chastised. Like a coach decides not to go for it on the 4th down, even though it's a better decision A to go for it, because if they go for it and they don't get it, they'll be chastised by the fans and by the team owners and by the announcers. So this is defensive decision making. And like I said, it's super, super costly organizationally, but it's also super costly personally. But there are some things you can do about it. And we're going to be short and sweet and get right to it. but I'll tell you some interesting studies along the way. Stephen, welcome. Greetings from the home of the Trailblazers. Woohoo! Trailblazers. I noticed that you didn't say the biggest city with the Oregon Ducks. Maybe that's next week. We'll see how they do, if they deserve to be highlighted in good thinking. Anyway, have you ever heard it wasn't the best decision that we could make, but it was the most defensible? And you get this a lot of times, like, you know, an investment advisor would have a much more defensible decision proposition if they invested in a company, a well-known company like Tesla, particularly if it was like the beginning of the year, than they would into an unknown company. So they have a more defensible position. Or a hiring manager might have a more defensible position hiring someone from a prestigious university or from a company that experienced a lot of success, even if that individual really didn't look to be the best candidate, but it was more defensible because they had some authority associated with them. All right. So Stephen says, I'd rather be right alone. If I don't need my job. And that's really a good point, because you have to be kind of weighing the downside of sticking out from a crowd. That gets back to maybe picking your arguments. Now, if you own the whole decision, like you own your own company and you don't have a board of directors and you don't have investors, you are more likely to have the lack of asymmetry, which I'll get into, that will allow you to make a decision and choose the best option and kind of take the heat. And obviously, this is a huge issue for innovation and change and kind of moonshot type of decision making. But it's also, we find that it's also very apparent in even simple decisions and life and death decisions, like ones your doctor makes. So there are ways around it. We'll get to that in a minute. All right. Prestigious university. Jennifer says PU, prestigious university. That is one of the triggers that can make the authority bias kick into gear, where you might default to an authority bias, deciding on decision B, a less good decision, versus decision A. All right. So to investigate the frequency and the causes of these defensive decisions, a team from the Max Planck Institute of Human Development surveyed a bunch of managers from all levels of hierarchy. And they found, and this was a pretty large survey study, they found that 80% of all respondents from the top levels of industry to mid-level and entry-level management positions reported that at least one of the 10 decisions that they made in the prior 12 months was made as a defensive decision, meaning they knew that the decision should have been option A, but they chose option B because it was more defensible. They also found that up to 25% of all decisions in organizations are defensive decisions. So you can start to see how this can be very costly. Now, one of the things to look out for is it's important to divorce the decision process from the outcome, because as good thinkers know, between every decision, good, bad, or otherwise, and every outcome is a lot of luck. So the outcome is not necessarily the best evidence of the quality of your decision process. And Jennifer says, not a sort of fact, maybe it wasn't 87%. Okay, yes. So we are not talking about sort of facts with this. We're talking about real studies. All right. So even at the highest levels, we find this defensive decision making. And the other study that was also from the Max Planck Institute for Human Development found a link between organizational culture and the frequency of defensive decisions. So decision makers in this particular study, decision makers were asked how they felt about how they felt about error communication within their company. So meaning How do you feel about reporting bad results to your boss? Or how do you feel about kind of sharing bad results with your team? Do you feel comfortable? Do you feel uncomfortable? And can you guess? Now, here's where you're going to guess the results. So you ready? And we'll get rubber chicken for whoever gets it right. All right. Given a higher level of comfort with reporting errors, how do you think that correlates with a higher or lower percentage of defensive decisions? You're more comfortable reporting error. Do you make more or do you make fewer defensive decisions? Well, there'll be a little lag. We'll give the chickens after, but if a company reports a higher comfort with error communication, they call it error communication, there tend to be fewer defensive decisions made. And that gives you a hint as a manager or as a leader of some of the things you can start to think about to avoid the massive costs of defensive decisions. And they also found that a positive communication culture was more positively correlated with, drum roll, lower frequency of defensive decisions. And, a positive culture starts with you. So Stephen says fewer. Yes, exactly. If you are more comfortable with reporting errors, talking about errors, reporting bad outcomes, giving bad news, you're going to find fewer defensive decisions. And this asymmetry, we'll talk about in a minute, and how you can kind of tweak your own management style, both for your own personal decisions and also if you're making decisions as a leader of a team. Morning, Adrian. Good morning. Welcome. We're talking about defensive decisions. So if you have people that work for you, hint, make sure they're not so terrified to tell you the bad news that they're more inclined to make defensive decisions. And that is kind of, and also make sure you're not so terrified to confront your bad news, where you are so into rationalization and not into reasoning, where you are so uncomfortable that you end up making defensive decisions for yourself just so you look good on Facebook. In their book, Medication Errors, Causes and Preventions, these two professors, Cohen and Davis, talk about a strange case of rectal earache. How many of you want to hear about the strange case of a rectal earache? Can you guess how that relates to defensive decisions? Good morning, Dane. How does a rectal earache relate to defensive decisions? Well, here is an example of, so there's this asymmetry we talked about in the football game, where you're going to get penalized more for screwing up than you will for a positive outcome. So that's an asymmetry. So you decide, I'm going to take the safer route regardless, because even if I take the better decision route and things go well, I won't be rewarded as much as I will if things be punished if things go wrong. This is this one with the rectal earache is the authority bias. All right. A physician ordered eardrops to be administered into the right ear of a patient suffering from pain and infection. And instead of writing out completely right ear on the prescription, the doctor abbreviated it, place in our ear, probably sloppy writing as well. The duty nurse misread our ear as rear. Now, upon receiving the prescription, she promptly put the required number of drops into the patient's butthole, into the patient's rear. This is kind of funny, but I mean, hopefully it was funny and not a problem for the patient, but it obviously made no sense. But neither the patient nor the nurse questioned it. It was a defensible decision for the nurse to go ahead with exactly what the doctor said, or what she thought he or she said, because it was more defensible than the decision to question the physician. So this is an example of a defensive decision that is made because you've got this strong authority bias. So we've got the asymmetry of punishment reward, and we've got the authority bias. Now, this asymmetry explains why your boss, who has nice rhetoric about challenging norms and thinking outside the box, is likely to continue with the status quo rather than thinking outside the box and challenging the status quo, because doing something different is more difficult and it's much easier to protect yourself from the negative outcomes of doing it like we always do it. How many of you have experienced this, maybe with senior management that is dictating bad decisions that you understand, maybe the board of directors is more comfortable with, or they're forcing you personally? And how many of you have been those senior management positions where, your board of directors is stamping this and you're like, you know what, this is just not a fight I'm going to make, or I'm going to get involved with? How many of you have made a defensive decision in a management role or an individual contributor role just because it was not worth it? It was not worth it. Now, if that turned out fine, the outcome can be fine. You might go, okay, that was fine. But still, what did you leave? What was the opportunity cost? What did you leave on the table by making a defensive decision? All right. Maybe you're more worried about being punished than you are rewarded. That's a cultural problem. Okay. So how about this one? Next question. Would you rather be right, or be liked? It's related to what would you rather be wrong in a crowd or right alone? But would you rather be right or liked? And while you're thinking about that, Adrian has something. In Britain, we refer to jobs worth people who reflexively react to unusual requests with, that's more than my job's worth. Oh, job's worth. Yes, because taking on that position is not worth losing your job. I'm going to drink some coffee because I'm losing, and your integrity and your courage and the upside. So if your job is more valuable than your integrity and your courage, that can cost you a tremendous amount organizationally, and maybe as an individual, it doesn't cost you that much. Now, Carla, I would rather be right if I'm proving an ethical point. Oh, that's a really good point. See, sometimes it depends. Like, what are you gonna, what decision are you making? Is it an ethical decision that would actually affect how you perceive yourself? Or is it just a decision that may cost the company, $1 billion? Right all the way. So Jose says right all the way. Okay. Now, being right at the expense of being liked can be unproductive. In another medical study, participants completed a self-administered questionnaire involving choices between a risky and a conservative medical procedure. And then doctors made decisions for their patients. So one set of doctors predicted what their patients would decide for themselves, and then all the doctors made decisions for themselves and then prescribed the factors they thought that would influence their decision. So you've got doctors saying, I think my patient would like this. I'm going to choose this for my patient, and I'm going to choose this for myself. So those kind of three conditions. And what do you think the results were? Now, I have to admit, I thought the results would be that the doctors picked the risky, not the conservative, because they thought patients wanted those risky medical procedures, and they didn't want to suffer the ire of the patient. But it turns out that doctors selected much more conservative treatments for their patients than they selected for themselves, even though doctors predicted that patients would choose the riskier procedure for themselves given their condition. So this is meant to imply that the riskier decision from a medical standpoint was probably more warranted, but the doctors chose a more conservative approach. And when they were surveyed, their decisions were strongly influenced by concerns of possible legal consequences. So, and you see this on the flip side, like doctors might do crazy surgeries, and people think, well, that's because a surgeon gets paid to do surgery. But it also may be that the patient is implying that if you don't do something with my illness, if you don't do something to treat me, I'm going to sue you. So the decision to do nothing or to do something less invasive may be the best decision, but the patient is giving hints that there may be a downside. So Adrian says respected is better than liked, and we both know. Right, Stephen? And yes, and Stephen says true that. I love it when we have people on the stream that know each other. All right, this is great. And it may be right help. I've missed one of them. Sorry, being right help you be more liked in the long run. Being right is a difficult thing, because if you are weighing whether you're right based on the outcome, it may not give you the best indication. So let's say that you chose decision A because in every single decision-making tactic, with every using your reliable decision process, decision A was clearly the better decision. You knew it, but you chose A, but your outcome wasn't great. You may not be liked, even though it was a better decision, because something unlucky happened. Like we had a pandemic, or, there was some, shipment error or supply chain disruption. All right. So what can you do as a patient to avoid defensive decision-making from your doctor? Any ideas? It's a pretty simple one, but it has profound effect. And that is, get your doctor to take your perspective. And sometimes as simple as asking the doctor, if you were me, like really me, not what would you do in my situation? Sometimes that will help you see into the doctor's option A, and not just see the defensive decision option B. Oh no, hijack away on the chat. It's totally fine. I love it. This is a live show. This is the beauty of a live show. So Jennifer says, good to be liked for the cohesion of the work environment, depending on how serious the implications are. Exactly. It depends. And this is why creating a culture of curiosity is an antidote for defensive decision-making. It actually is, it is a massive, it's a massive saver of downside. That's a very inarticulate way of saying it. And Carla says, you may not be liked, but you may be respected for making your decision and standing firm in it. And the main thing is to being able to defend your decision with reliable, relevant evidence. And this is why prioritizing critical thinking communication is tantamount. You have to be able to, if you can make your case using reliable, relevant evidence, then you're not so reliant on the outcome. And that's, from the Good Thinking Show, we talk about all this stuff, and we'll be talking about more. We're going to be having interviews and bringing people on. So stay with us Mondays, 9 a.m. right here, LinkedIn Live and YouTube Live. Becky Saltzman, subscribe. Hit that, smash that bell if you want to get notifications. And okay, so we're going to wrap it up by talking about of all the decision shortcuts. Let me just say this: of all the decision shortcuts you can make, probably defensive decision-making is one of the most costly. And, you might hire a consultant to do a 150-page analysis to justify a decision that is wise to make, because your shareholders will be more supportive if you have McKinsey's stamp or Deloitte's stamp on it or something like that. Or you hire a high-priced consultant that was hired by another, prestigious company or successful company, or came from a prestigious organization or university to tell you, what you need to know. And that may be a way around defensive decision-making. Or you just get a bunch of analysis paralysis to justify a decision. This is where you're kind of fighting against that defensive decision making, and it can be extremely costly. Whereas if you have the right culture in place and the right questions in place and the right assumptions to bust, you can attack that. So here we're going to go. We're going to just do 3 quick things that you can do as a decision maker to avoid defensive decision making. Number 1, be aware of authority bias. Know the difference between someone who has authority, your boss, the doctor, and someone who is an authority. And you may say, well, isn't my doctor an authority? How many times have you asked your friend who's an ophthalmologist, what do you think I should do about my I don't know what, something that dermatology, a doctor is not a doctor is not a doctor. So you may have authority, but you may not be an authority. Hi, Vinay. Way, I'm so glad you're here. So Carla, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you. I know real life examples are important for sure, especially when you're getting into this how to think stuff, because it's like, wait a minute. So beware of whether the person that is suggesting option B, being the lesser decision, is an authority or has an authority. Now, if they have authority over you, that's when you need to see about the best way to communicate that you think option A is a better option and they think option B is a better option, and you have to be able to make your case. And we're going to talk about that, how to make your case. Hopefully I'll be launching a couple of new critical thinking courses on LinkedIn Learning in 2021 about making your case, both a good argument and a persuasive argument, and they're different. If you want to know the difference, let me know. Maybe we'll do a show on that. All right. Okay. The second one is to avoid asymmetry, which is great outcomes. When great outcomes carry a tiny upside, but poor outcomes carry a tremendous downside. Back to the football. If you go for it on the fourth down and you get it, they're like, yay, you did it. Because really people know that, unless you're going for it on the fourth down and you're, in your opponent's territory and you're going, it's like, 4th and 50, obviously that would be like, wow, I can't believe you did something so stupid and you were successful. But, if it's 4th and 5 at the 50-yard line, sorry for non-football players, but like you go for it and you get it, they're like, yay. But if you go for it and you don't, that asymmetry is you're going to be punished much more severely for that. And that happens all the time. No, I did not used to be an attorney before, but I've been accused of such horrible things now. Carla, that's funny. And then the last thing is, so be sure to challenge asymmetry. And whether you have that in your own life or you run an organization or you're managing an organization, beware of this asymmetry between outcomes. And also understand the outcome bias that, again, between every decision, even every great decision and every outcome, every bad decision and every outcome is a lot of luck. So if I blindfold myself, I make the decision to blindfold myself and walk in traffic and at night, and I don't get killed, but someone does some great social media expose on my wise decision-making, that outcome was not indicative. That good outcome was not indicative of a good decision process. So separating the outcome from the decision process. And finally, encourage curiosity. Reward and award curious questions and make sure that you value with yourself and with your team, if you're a leader managing a team, questions that can't be answered over answers that can't be questioned. Thank you, Richard Feynman, for that brilliant quote. So that's it. Defensive decision-making hurts companies and protects the decision maker. In studies that I've done with many companies, I would say that it happens to about 1/3 to 1/2 of all decisions have some element of defensive decision-making. And, when the stakes aren't that high, maybe it's okay. But when the stakes are high, it is extremely costly. So remember, is it a defensive decision? Am I going with B when I should go with A? Anyway, oh, good. 29 minutes and 27 seconds. We're trying to do this 30 minutes. See you next week right here on LinkedIn Live and on YouTube Live. Good thinking, where we give ourselves a little jump start to our week, unless you're coming from out of the country where you might be the end of Monday, to give ourselves just a little bit of time to focus on improving how we think. We deserve that. Thanks, good thinkers. Have a great week.